All right, everybody, welcome back to our Faces of Free Enterprise series. I'm excited today to be visiting with Senator Phil Gramm and Professor Don Boudreaux. The series, as you know, was created in an effort to continue to tell our story and the many stories that are out there that have meaningful, in the aim of having a meaningful conversation on how free enterprise really built our nation, continues to lift up families and communities, and will drive America and Oklahoma's future. Today, we're talking about a new book called The Triumph of Economic Freedom. It's a deep dive into some of the great myths of American capitalism, which sadly discontinue to be propagated today. And it's written by two college professors that are experts in their field. You're going to recognize one of the authors, perhaps, from his involvement in American politics for a long time. Senator Phil Gramm from Texas, three-term member of Congress before that, and then serving 18 years representing the people of Texas as chair of the mostly the chair of the banking committee. Of course, she had other committee assignments as well. Professor Don Boudreaux is a senior fellow and professor of economics at George Mason University. He's an incredibly accomplished author and economist. And this book really, in its release, is right up our alley. This public narrative around our economic system has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. Senator, I'm going to start with you maybe just to kind of kick this off. How would you describe this book to others, and why did you want to write it, and why now?
Well, I wanted to write it because I found that when I was dealing with people who had very different views of the role of government in a free society than I had, that when I probed as to what they thought happened in the Industrial Revolution, uh, their views of the success of progressive era regulation, what they thought caused the Depression. Did they believe that foreign competition hollowed out American manufacturing after the war? Did they think deregulation caused the financial crisis? And what did they think about the causes of poverty and inequality? I found that they had a totally different view of the history of our country and assessment of the two contemporary issues we looked at than I did. And then when Don and I started the research, we found that their view was the conventional view, that in fact, in almost every case, the best-selling high school textbook and the best-selling college textbook presented what we present as the myth that we then set out using facts to debunk.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm going to ask Professor to take that now to the now. You're teaching, young people today. You're on the front lines of it, and you're dealing with, preconceived notions and biases when they come in. I'm curious, what is it like to teach, to talk about and teach capitalism today versus maybe 20 to 30 years ago, and what's changed?
So I teach mostly 18-year-olds. I enjoy teaching Introduction to Economics, Econ 101. So I have a large auditorium section of freshmen, mostly freshman students every semester. And I can tell you most of them, I got to say, most of them come in with open minds. They're still 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. Not many have already closed their minds. But what's in their minds now is what was put in there by popular culture and also by what they learned in high school. And what we find in what I find in my students is what Phil just reports he finds in the people that he speaks to. They have these fallacies that they take for granted, that they just assume are as well established as the law of gravity. Well, of course, poor people were impoverished during the Industrial Revolution. Of course, the Great Depression represented a failure of capitalism, and that the New Deal is this great, wonderful program that saved us from the Depression. Of course, free international trade is bad for ordinary men and women, and we need protectionism and industrial policy to stop this scourge of our economy. That's what they're taught, most of them, in high school. That's what they hear in the popular press and media. And so it's actually kind of a thrill for me. And thrill is not too strong a word, to teach them basic economics and to try my best to disabuse them of that. But with this book that Senator Gramm and I wrote, we're able to reach a larger audience and not, just 18-year-olds that I now teach.
So would you rattled off a couple right there, some of the myths.
Mhm.
What would you say are the top three things that you kind of have to work on, undoing or unlearning and kind of reestablishing a baseline on?
So we have a chapter in the book on inequality, and without a doubt, one of the major fallacies that most of my students come into college with is that wealth is a fixed sum. It's just a fixed amount in the world. And so if it's unequally distributed, that means rich people got rich at the expense of poor people. And the only way they make poor people better off is to take from the rich and give to the poor. That's what most of them believe. That's what they're taught in high school. I think sound economics disabuses people of that fallacy. We have a chapter in the book that provides evidence and argumentation against that fallacy. So that's number one. This notion that inequality is a result of exploitation, the rich taking an undeserved share from the poor who are left with little. Uh, there is one thing that we don't deal with in the book that also arises often in my classrooms, and that's the environmental point. Most of my students believe that capitalism is terrible for the environment. That's another myth we just didn't have room and space in the book to deal with. But evidence and economic theory both show that the richer the country, the freer the country, the freer the markets, the the cleaner the environment. Most of my students don't believe that. So those are two that I would highlight as being constant uh, presences in the minds of the young people who I teach.
This issue of zero sum game,
Yeah.
right, that I think you're kind of alluding to here, and versus that, economies expand, wealth, is not a finite amount of, of stuff out there that's divided. You can continue to create more, is lost on people. Um, Talk about that maybe, Senator, just a little bit. You mentioned that in the interview that I watched of the two of you, but maybe talk about, your experience in trying to open people's eyes that it is not a zero sum game. It's not win-lose.
Well, Rick, this is an old debate going back to Plato. Plato thought democracy was the best economic system, but that it couldn't survive because of that demagogues would arise who would raise the issue of inequality and destroy a democracy. But in Plato's world, you had virtually no economic growth. Wealth was in property ownership within a city state. The world we live in is a world where we create wealth. When somebody goes to the University of Oklahoma and gets a degree in engineering and gets out of school and makes twice as much as someone who didn't go to high school, they're not making that money because they took it away from the person who didn't go to college. They're making that money because they raise the value of their human capital. They produce more, and therefore they earn more. Elon Musk is rich, real rich, but he made me richer. I used to have an old antiquated system trying to get to internet living out in the country. When his little satellite came and I stuck it on the corner of my house, it cost 1/10 what the system I had cost, and it was 3 times as good. So he's rich, but I'm richer. And I was talking the other day about a 529 plan I did for my granddaughter, where we put $22,000 in the year she was born and 22 the next year and then stopped. That account now is worth $498,000. Thank you, Google. Thank you, Microsoft. Uh, People got rich building those companies, but my granddaughter got the capital to get an education because of the success of those companies. So we shared in their wealth. They didn't take it from us. They made society richer, and we're part of society.
This issue of aligned interest, which is really at the heart of kind of what you just described, is also, I think, lost on a lot of people. The CEOs and the ones that we recognize and we see that somehow get resented for their success. Um, it's lost on a lot of folks that the investors, society, and those of us that buy their products and their services, if they're good products and services, right, we're all winning in that.
That's right.
But Professor, talk about that. I mean, just, do you see light bulbs go on with folks as you kind of walk them through this issue of what I would describe as of aligned interest in what makes capitalism so great?
So I like to tell my students and anybody who will listen that one of the great features of a modern capitalist society is the ability of everyone to say no. Right? Jeff Bezos cannot command my business. If he wants my business, he has to make it attractive for me to use his services because I can say no. So even the richest man in the world, one of the richest men in the world, he has an incentive to please me. And that's a wonderful thing. And every American, every person in a free society has the right to say no. And what that does is align the interests of producers with consumers. That causes producers to be more productive, and that causes consumers to be wealthier, as Phil just explained with his little satellite dish example. And the evidence is all around us. I tell my students also this: you think capitalism doesn't work? Go into a supermarket. Just look at the 40,000 different items in an ordinary American Safeway or Kroger. And who brought that to you? They're there for you to buy. You don't have to buy it. You can say no. All these people from around the world working to supply an ordinary American supermarket with fresh vegetables and beer and household goods, paper towels. It's an amazing system. And it works so well, unfortunately, that we take it for granted. It looks like it happens automatically, but it doesn't.
Well, not only do we take it for granted, but there's also a perception that in some ways and it's an interesting probably case study in psychology. Taking Amazon or Kroger, for example, that somehow the more successful you are, and in some ways the better my life is becoming, more
Yes.
convenient, whatever, and the cheaper the products are, and I can go to one place to get them all. That somehow the bigger it becomes, the more evil it has to be. Uh, or in the whole kind of, hey, big business bad, small business good. Somehow the bigger you get, you're the greedy capitalist. But if you're the corner coffee shop, I'm supporting the little guy, and that's free enterprise, and I like that. Maybe hit however you guys want to divide that up. Hit that. This the bigger you get, the more intrinsically bad it must be. Smaller it is, the better. Even though I'm voting with my dollar, to your point, no one's forcing me to go into one or the other. I probably go to both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's almost cognitive dissonance.
Starbucks doesn't make you come in to buy their coffee. Let me respond by saying there's a long history of this view that big is bad. And in America, with the development of the railroads and the telegraph and in nationwide markets, and with efficiencies from mass production in things like steel, we produced a fairly significant number of big companies. But it's important in looking at the data that those big companies were so efficient that prices fell dramatically and the well-being of people in America improved at rates never experienced between 1870 and 1900. The life, the ability to acquire the items that create and sustain life and make it meaningful in America grew more rapidly than it had ever done for any people who had ever breathed the breath of life on the planet. And it occurred because of the development of large, efficient companies. And so the question comes, at what point does big become bad? And the answer, we believe, is when big produces power which is used to restrict supply, to drive up price, to hurt the consumer. When big serves the consumer, it's not bad. When it harms the consumer, it is bad. But what government tends to want to do is many progressives or liberals, or even as they call themselves now, socialists, want only the government to be big.
Yeah.
Only the government to have any power. They fear the ability of business, especially, to push back against big government. And that's what a lot of this so-called antitrust action is about. And once you give the government the power to hold companies down or to build them up or to pick winners and losers, you start to lose economic freedom. And without economic freedom, all other freedoms have no meaning, because the government can take away your livelihood, it can take away your freedom.
Yeah,
And that's a major point of the book.
Yeah, let me just put a little, make one small point in addition to it, everything that Senator Gramm said. Note the irony. Even the biggest business, and by the way, every business that's big started off small. It grew because it's satisfying consumers. That's what allowed that business, that big business, to grow big. Even the biggest business, a consumer can say no to that business. Again, I can say no to Amazon. Uh, the government, you can't say no to the government. So it's very odd that someone would want to try to suppress the so-called power of big business by giving more power to the government, an agency to which you can't say no, not reasonably so. So I think that's an irony that a lot of people miss.
That's a good point.
I think there's a number of ironies in all this.
Yeah.
And I think part of what we're trying to do again with this series is to kind of reset, right, some of these definitions and get some of the facts straight and the opinions drawn from those, hopefully better aligned based on, a right set of facts. You brought up something, Senator, about the role of government. You described it a little bit there. We're seeing a lot of government intervention right now in the economy, playing out with tariffs, taking positions in public markets in particular companies and or sectors overall. Um, it's been a lot of unprecedented movement very, very quickly. Um, thoughts about that? And is it a runaway train, or are we gonna? You think there, at some point it pulls back?
Well, I think at some point people have to be involved in pulling it back. I think it's very dangerous having government taking equity positions in private companies. And it's interesting that a Republican administration would be doing this, since Democrats have always wanted to force big business to put union representatives on their board, to put representatives from government on their board. And I think you open up a lot of problems here, a can of worms, as the cliche goes, when you get into this business. And of course, in terms of tariffs, these are taxes on consumers. And even if businesses ate the cost, which the president pressures them to do, don't forget those businesses are owned by your pension funds. So that when the cost, it lowers the value of your pension fund. So in the end, government intervention in setting prices, imposing tariffs, and taking equity positions represent dangerous movements that are harmful to the consumer. Where will we go from here? I hope we'll decide quickly this is a bad idea and get out of it.
Yeah. And you know, Rick, the one of the reasons why we're getting all this protectionism now is because people have a mistaken view of what happened in the American economy over the past several decades. And this view, it actually began on the left and it's sort of migrated to the political right. And this view is that trade has left ordinary Americans in bad shape. And in our book, chapter 4 of our book, we have lots of evidence showing that that is simply untrue. American manufacturing is doing just fine. American industry is doing just fine. Industrial capacity is at an all-time high. Real wages, even for ordinary workers, are at an all-time high. Living standards are at an all-time high and growing. And those things are put at risk by these protectionist measures and these other interventions, such as government taking an equity stake in private firms. The disease isn't really there, but the cure is going to create the disease. And that's a great irony.
Yeah, cures often kill patients.
Yeah, yeah. And in this case, the patient isn't even really sick.
Yeah.
I always find that to that end, people administer cures, what they think are cures, with good intention. I
Yeah.
mean, they just have a different worldview about the whole thing. And I think that's kind of what can equally be dangerous, right? Is because people get authentically defensive about their position because they feel like it's rooted in good.
Yeah.
Um, and without having studied potentially everything behind it, and understanding where the potential pitfalls might be. History repeats itself. As we start thinking about where we're at today and some of these old ideas that have been tried and failed, but now are coming back into the discussion again. Um, what's the best way to combat that? And what's the best way, a group like us, the state chamber, can work with policymakers to remind them that, we need to stick with what's working versus, go back to failed experiments.
Well, I think it's important that people know the experiments were undertaken and that they failed. And again, that's the purpose of this book. The purpose of this book is to take the 7 great fallacies that normally mislead people about the history of our country and therefore have an impact on their view of what government can do that's right or what it does that's wrong. And our idea is to try to set the facts straight so that people can, based on what actually happened, make a judgment about the future. The only window we have in the future is the past. And so that's what we're trying to do in this book. And if people read this book, they will understand, I believe, these 7 great myths. And you run into one almost every day. And so, the Bible says, you shall know the truth and the truth will make you free, but it doesn't tell you how to get the truth. And what we're trying to do here is find the truth. Now, it's up to the reader to judge how close we came, but you can order this book on Amazon and read it. We don't want people to buy it and put it on the bookshelf. We want them to buy it and read it. And I think if they do, they will find that we live in a much greater country than they even knew or dreamed we did.
A country that still has a lot of potential to get even greater and more
Exactly.
prosperous. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's close out on that because you guys are great defenders of the free enterprise and capitalistic system. Maybe Professor, starting with you, 30 seconds or less, elevator pitch
Yeah.
on why this is the greatest system in the world.
It's the greatest system in the world because it gives ordinary people maximum opportunity to use their talents as they wish and as they can in ways that are best for them and their family. And it gives them the greatest amount of freedom to spend the fruits of the use of their talents, their incomes, in ways that improve their lives as they judge best without having other people impose their views on them. The great Thomas Sowell ended his 1980 book, Knowledge and Decisions, with a quotation that I love. He said, freedom is not simply the right of intellectuals to circulate their merchandise. It is above all the right of ordinary people to find elbow room for themselves and a refuge from the rampaging presumptions of their betters. And in our system, we've diminished the ability of our betters to impose their presumptions on us. And that's a wonderful thing.
Senator, close us out.
Well, look, Boudreaux is a Cajun from Louisiana, from a blue-collar worker family. I'm a redneck, which neither of my parents graduated from high school. We're ordinary people, but we live in an extraordinary country. And that extraordinary country gave us the ability to do miraculous things. And if we can preserve freedom and all of its essentials, then the greatest essential is economic freedom. There's no limit to the future of the American people. And if you want to understand that, read our book,
Here.
The Triumph of Economic Freedom. Thank you so much, Rick. It was great.